And how's it going, guys? Josh Olufemii here, live in LA, and welcome to yet another creative week with Herman Huang, aka Coffee Liquor. Today we're going to be talking about the city blend effect. Creative week is a time when we step in every day with one of my friends that's more creative and more talented than myself and conquer a lot of really cool topics. Coffee Liquor is going to be releasing one video every day this week, diving into the incredible world of VFX. You can actually download the project file that Herman's going to be using so you can follow along in the link below. Try this though, watch this tutorial all the way through once, just sitting back and relaxing and soaking it in, and then download the project file, and then watch it a second time, and then actually do the tutorial with me while editing with the project file. But first, of course, we're going to be talking about Envato Elements. If you're watching this video, you're probably a video editor, and Envato Elements is a video editor's dream. It's a subscription service that gives you unlimited downloads of the most incredible stock footage, like cloud and fog overlays, aerial footage, fire, lightning. They also have incredible VFX packs, Premiere and After Effects templates, sound effects, royalty-free music, and literally anything you could ever want as a video editor. Just by clicking the link below, you can get a 70% discount for your first month. Basically, you're just paying $9. And that's it. I use Elements literally in some regard every day.
Thank you as always for the sick introduction, Josh. How's it going, guys? It's Herman here, and we're gonna learn 3 simple ways for you to city bend that you can use in your next travel film or anything that requires a cityscape. Now, this was initially inspired by a video I saw from Benn TK, in which a drone would fly past some buildings and it would become this bird's eye view. Now, I thought this was such a sick transition that reminded me of movies like Inception and Doctor Strange, and instead of just one, I wanted to provide you with 3 different ways for you to do it so you can create some variety for your next video. Now, I encourage you to first watch through the entire tutorial once, just so you get a better understanding of what needs to be done, and then you can follow along with the project file that is actually provided for you in the video description below. I'll be using Envato Elements' wide range of stock footage to be doing these effects, so when you open up this project file, the footage will be offline unless you get it from Elements. Anyways, guys, there's a lot to cover, so buckle up and let's get into the first effect. Now, let's start it off with the first one that inspired me to do this tutorial, and what I love about this is this change in perspective. So basically, it goes into the next shot before I even realize it. I'm already sucked in. It's like a really good magic trick. Now, there are 2 shots that you're gonna need, of course. Now, one of them is going to be pushing through some buildings. It doesn't necessarily need to be a drone. It could just be on a stabilizer. It's really up to you and how you want the transition to look like. The second shot that you need is, of course, a shot that the perspective is changed. So in this case, it's a bird's eye view of the city streets. Now, if you're shooting your own footage, what I encourage you to do is to actually add a bit of a tilt up action, kind of like the reference video, because that, I believe, gives it a nice flow to the camera direction. However, it's okay if you don't. It can still look dope. The one that I did didn't have any tilting up action and it still looks pretty good, I think. And you can always add some digital movement in post by keyframing in After Effects. Okay, we've just launched After Effects and we have both footage that we're going to be using imported into After Effects. As you can see, there's the first one where the drone flies past these 2 beautiful buildings, and then we also have a bird's eye view, which it will transition into. So make sure that you have 2 clips. So you're going to take this first clip and you're going to drag it into this icon, which will create a new composition. We'll call it main comp. And then we'll put it in the tutorial bin because organization is really important. And essentially what's going to happen is we're going to mask out this area. We're going to create a matte to cut it out, and it's going to show the bird's eye view. I like to first create some tracking data so that I can kind of pin the footage to these buildings and also use it to create a matte. Now, this isn't a mandatory step to get this to work, but I do recommend it because it does make it a little bit easier. I suggest that you just watch it through and see if it'll be easier for you as well. So how we do that is we highlight this clip. We're going to bring up Mocha, and I'm using a plugin called Effects Console from Video Copilot to bring up the effects. It's a nice little plugin that's free and saves you a bit of time when you're pulling up effects, so I highly recommend it. You're gonna hit this Mocha icon, and I'm gonna make sure that the resolution is full. That's why it gave me that warning, just making sure that we have the highest quality footage to use. I'm gonna bring in this Mocha window, and basically I'm just going to track one of the buildings. I don't need to track both. I think just this should be okay. And then I'm going to hit this track forward button, and it's gonna do its magical thing that Mocha always does. And the reason that I'm not tracking both the buildings is because as the drone flies closer, the buildings will spread apart and it'll be a little bit weird for the tracking. That's why I suggest just doing one building. Okay, so Mocha has worked its magic. We now have some tracking data and it's tracking to this building. We can hit Control S to save the data and then close Mocha. Okay, so now that we have that, we're gonna create a null object. So we're gonna right click an empty space like this, hit new, go to Null Object. And the reason we have this is because we're going to rename this to track, and we're going to export the tracking data that we just made in Mocha and apply it to this track layer. So we're going to highlight this clip over here, the one with the Mocha effect, and then we're going to go to tracking data. We're going to create track data, and then there's only one layer over here that we tracked. So we're going to hit OK. It's going to bring in all that nice data that I got. And then here at export option, we're going to go to transform because that's the type of data that we're going to apply. We're going to layer export to the track layer, meaning that's a target of where the data is going to apply to. And now we finally hit this nice big button here, apply export. And what that does, if you take a look at the track layer and I hit U, which brings up all the keyframes, you can see that there's a nice keyframe, and you can see that this red box, which is the null object, is pinned to the building. So you're probably wondering, Herman, what are we going to do with this? And there's two things that we're going to make. Number one is a matte, which is basically going to cut out this area that we want to reveal the aerial shot. And the second use is that we're going to pin the footage of the bird's eye view to the building. So let's first create a matte. So we're going to hit Control Y, which brings up a new solid like this. We're going to name it to matte, and then just make sure that the width and height match the composition. And here's what's going to happen. We're going to parent it to the track layer. And how we do this is by taking this pick whip over here, parent pick whip, and we're going to drag it over to the track so that's highlighted, meaning it becomes a child, parent and child. So the parent is going to tell what the child should do, and then it's going to follow this tracking data. So all this position, scale, and rotation will be applied to this matte. And we're going to hide the visibility of the matte, and we're going to start keyframing the area that we want to cut out. So how we're going to do that is hit G, which brings up the pen tool. We're going to mask the area that we want to basically cut out and reveal the bird's eye shot. Now in this case, I'm just going to cut out this kind of square over here. And even though we can still see the sky and the cutout doesn't, cover the entire thing, I'm going to be adjusting the position and the scale later to crop the top portion. But for now, I'm just going to cut out the area that I want to cut out. So in this case, I'm going to basically draw a box starting from here and then over here, and then we'll let this be kind of the dividing line, and then we start doing this. And we're just going to go to the top of the building, not going to be too picky. And then starting from here, it's not going to be perfect, but as you can see with the tracking data, it does a lot of the work in terms of getting the position right for the cutout. Now, because there's parallax and the buildings will progressively move farther apart, the mask is not going to be perfect. That's why you're going to need to keyframe it and adjust the position. And how we're going to do that is by hitting M, which will bring the mask path. We're going to go to the point that we drew that mask, which I think was like somewhere around here. This looks right. Okay, we're going to hit the stopwatch, which will keyframe it, and then we're going to scrub through this whole thing to make sure that the lines match up. So we want to include as much of the building as possible. And at this point, I'm going to kind of shift this over like this. And there's this little top part over here that I'm going to add some points by hitting G again, which will add some points over here. And then we're going to readjust it. Now I'm done keyframing my mask. And if I turn the visibility on, as you can see, it's just a white square that's tracked on to this empty space that will be revealing the aerial shot. I'm going to hit F to bring up the mask feather because this is a pretty hard edge right now. So I'm going to maybe change it to around 2 or maybe 1. And then if I need to adjust it later, I'll do so. But once you have that, you are ready to bring in your aerial clip. So in this case, it's this one over here. I'm just going to drag it in. And then I'm going to hit S so I can reposition the scale to something that I think will be appropriate. For now, I'm just going to do something simple like this. And then I'm going to bring it underneath the matte layer. And here's where the fun starts to happen. We're going to go to the track matte over here, where it says none right now, and we're going to click Luma Matte. And that's essentially allowing us to see through this area. Now we move on to the next part, which is basically getting the movement to kind of match and look better, because right now the bird's eye footage is looking a little bit off compared to the push through footage, and that's where this tracking data will come in. Now, if you don't have any movement in your bird's eye view, then it'll look a little bit better. But in this case, if I just solo this, you can see the bird's eye view slightly flies upwards. So what you can do is parent this layer to the track data. However, in this case, I'm going to do it manually because I think it'll give me a little more control. So I'm going to unsolo this, hit S, and I'm going to hit P as well, Shift P, and then it'll bring up both of these parameters. And what I'm going to do is find the kind of final position that I actually want this to be in. So something around here, I'm going to get in the final position, kind of like this. Hit the stopwatch so I can keyframe it, and then go to the very beginning. And then I'm just going to manually do this. Now, this isn't looking too bad so far. It's a little bit rough, but you can always adjust the position and scale and finesse it however much you like. Now, what happens next is I'm going to try and blend it together with the scene by matching the color and also kind of darkening this area so it has a little bit less of a definitive line. So the bird's eye shot wouldn't look like I just slapped it in there. So in this case, I added some curves to this layer so that it's a little bit pinkish, and it matches the scene for the bird's eye view a little bit better. And then for the bird's eye shot, I actually added 2 curves and a camera blur over here, just so it's not looking too sharp. If it's out in the distance, I believe there should be a bit of a blur to it. So this is starting to look a little bit better, but there's still this line that I'm worried about. And how I'm going to combat that is by making a new adjustment layer and then adding a curves to darken that area. So we're going to rename this to darken. Going to hit Control Spacebar so that I can bring up curves like this. And then we're just going to darken the area a little bit. And then I'm going to just mask that area by hitting this and then the ellipse tool. And then I'm just going to draw basically a mask around the area that I want to darken. I'm not going to get too fancy over here. I hit F to bring the mask path. I'm going to soften that darkness so that there's no hard line. And then at this point, I can always use the tracking data like this, so that it tracks to the scene. Now, as I mentioned before, ideally, it would be great to add a bit of a tilt action or a pan or some sort of movement to kind of blend it together a little better. So in this case, I'm going to right click, hit new, create a null object. And instead of applying a tracking data or anything like that, we're going to create our own data by calling it reposition first. And we're going to basically keyframe the scale and the position. So just like before, we're going to hit S to bring up the scale, and then Shift P, which will show both the position and the scale like this. So I'm going to first parent everything that is not parented. So these 3 over here, and then I'm going to drag the pick whip while those 3 layers are highlighted and drop it on the reposition. And basically I can now scale it, reposition it, do whatever I want because it is now the parent. I don't know if this is an analogy to always listen to your parents, but it doesn't matter. We're gonna just scale it up so that it crops the top part a little bit. We're going to reposition it like this so that you don't really see the top part. Now, ideally, you would create a matte over here as well on the left and the right because you can see that that's the background and it's not the same as this. I did it in my main comp over here on the left and the right earlier. But in this case, I'm just gonna do it in the middle just so you understand the method of how to do it, since it'll depend on the footage that you're using. But I'm happy with this crop over here. I'm going to just have it over here. I'm gonna hit the stopwatch, position, and scale. I'm just gonna move it to the beginning. And then starting from here, I'm just gonna scrub through and see what I wanna do. As I said, I want it to look like it's kind of flying upwards, so I'm going to position it so that it goes down, kind of like this. So now when I play it through, this is essentially what it looks like, which isn't perfect, but is roughly how it's done. Now, of course, getting it to look from an amateur to something a little more professional takes a lot of details. And what you adjust is going to depend on, like I said, the footage that you're using. So in this case, I'm just gonna break down the other composition where I actually spent a little more time on it. And some things were spending a little more time with darkening the area over here, as you can see, and that's keyframed. And then I also added a vignette to the scene to give it a little more of a cinematic feel. And I also added a color grade. And that basically unifies both footage so that it looks more like it matches. And all I did was play with the curves over here and also added this leave color effect so that it only shows more of the peachy yellow tone. And then we have a light hit over here, which is basically a lens flare that you can get from anywhere. You can get it from your favorite royalty-free site or Envato Elements. They have a lot of those as well. But those are essentially the only differences between the tutorial comp that we work with just now and the one that you see here. And speaking of details and adjustments according to your footage, in this case, this footage was a little bit bent because of the perspective. So I basically straightened it out, which is of course optional. And also later in the footage, as it is progressively getting closer to the bird's eye view, I started darkening this footage over here. I'm gonna hit U and show you that the curves over here were keyframed so that it would gradually get darker because I wanted to bring less attention to those buildings now that the focus should shift into the bird's eye view. Now, before we continue, if you're liking the video so far, please check out my Instagram page @CoffeeLicker, and you can see what I've been working on. Shoot me a DM if you want to chat or if you got any questions as well, because I'd be more than happy to reply back. All right, let's continue. And moving on to the next city bending technique. This one is inspired by an Instagram post that I saw from an account called Film Spectacle. I thought it was really dope and clever with the way how they basically blended the skies together and mirrored the cityscape to create this interesting visual. Once you filmed your footage or acquired it, then let's dive into After Effects. Now this one is super simple to do. What I recommend is having a cityscape shot very similar to this, and then it's kind of a revolving type of shot, which I think is interesting for a loop. However, you can really use anything that involves a skyline. So I'm gonna drag this footage and create a new comp based off of it. Now you can speed it up or play with the timing however you like. Now in this case, I sped it up for my final video, but for the tutorial, I'm just gonna use the normal speed. So in this case, I'm just gonna use this part of the shot, just like this. And we're gonna hit Control D to duplicate this footage. We're gonna hit S to bring up the scale, and then we're gonna unlock the proportions over here, the constrained proportions. And what that'll allow us to do is to play with just the Y axis of the scale. We're going to input negative, so it's going to be minus 100. And what that does is flip the footage around like this, so it's upside down now. I'm going to hit T to bring up the opacity, and I'm going to just bring it a little bit lower so that I can see both footage. Now we're not going to keep it this way because it looks kind of weird for the final effect, but we're using it as a reference so I can know where both footage is positioned. So I basically want to reposition the top and the bottom so that none of the city parts overlap with each other, but I want the sky to kind of blend like this. Now I'm gonna hit Alt and apostrophe, which will bring up this green grid over here. And I'm just going to make sure that's mirrored along the middle line over here, kind of like this. Okay, this is not looking too bad. So we're gonna take the top footage, I'm gonna bring the opacity back to 100, and then I'm going to grab this tool, the rectangle tool, and I'm gonna mask the area over here. And then I'm going to blend it by hitting F to bring up the mask feather. We're gonna do something like 50, but we can always adjust it to whatever we like. And then if I play this through, we've got an interesting shot that looks like this. Now, another thing you can do to make it look more mirrored is by taking that top footage, we're gonna hit S, and we're also going to change the X axis to minus 100, and that will mirror it like so. And boom, there you have it. It's as simple as that for you to do this mirrored cityscape effect. Now, as I mentioned before, all I did for the other footage was that I sped it up and then I had it boomerang back and forth, which is not too hard to do. I just reversed the timing after I did the effect. And then I also cropped it so that it would match Instagram's dimension, and then added a rotation. And there are these pretty things I overlapped on top, like film burns and film grain, but that's totally optional. They're just extra little things to spice it up. Now, third and final city bending technique was inspired by a tutorial I saw. It's actually a Photoshop tutorial on how to do the technique. And then I thought, this can probably be applied to a video. So I tried it out. Looks dope. Now I get to learn how to do it. Now, there are a few things to be careful of if you're filming or acquiring footage to apply this technique on. Number one is that cars, when they bend 90 degrees, they don't actually look that flat and two-dimensional. So that's why I'm using a footage that's basically a time lapse in which it looks like these light streaks that's being bent. Now, another crucial thing to watch out for is the footage that you'll be using or shooting should relatively match the perspective that I'm using. Basically, the leading lines would come from the sides, kind of the edge, towards the middle. Because what's happening is you're gonna be warping the sides so that it looks vertical to give that illusion. Other than those things that you gotta watch out for, it's not a very hard technique to do. So once you have your footage, let's just throw it into After Effects. Just throw it in there. Chuck it with care. All right, you got your footage in After Effects. This is the footage that I'm using, and I'm going to only use the part in the beginning where the camera doesn't pan like this. So that's around the first second, and then it's already trimmed over here so that I can drag this footage into a new composition like so, and it will only include the part that I trimmed. So what'll happen now is I'm just going to reposition this by hitting S first to scale in a little bit, and then repositioning it so it's a little more centered. And then I'm gonna click this layer, I'm gonna hit Control-Shift-C to pre-comp this and call it repositioned footage, like so. Okay, on to the next step. We are going to duplicate this layer, and then we are going to also pre-comp this layer. As you can tell, I like pre-comping things, so I'm gonna use the same shortcut, Control-Shift-C, and then we're gonna call this cropped and hit OK. And the reason we're calling it cropped is because we are going to crop the area that we want to distort the road. So going into this comp, by double clicking it like so, I'm going to basically crop the area where I want the city bend to happen. And I kind of want the road to start bending around here for this example. And how I'm going to do so is I'm going to click this region of interest. And what this does is, just like the rectangle tool, I'm going to basically draw a box for the area that I want to show. And this is the area that I want to work with. And then the next step is I'm going to go to composition and I'm going to hit crop comp to region of interest. And as the name suggests, it's going to crop the composition so it's the same dimension as the region of interest that we just drew. And now we're going to go back to our previous composition and we're going to reposition it to the same as the one underneath. That was actually pretty good. And there you have it, guys. It looks like nothing has happened because nothing has happened yet. We haven't actually applied any effects to distort the road, but here's where the fun begins. Here's where we start applying the effect. We're going to highlight the top layer. We're going to bring in the effect CC power pin. And then what's going to happen is we're going to drag the bottom left and bottom right pins inwards so that this perspective of this line over here is going to be vertically down. So while hitting shift, I'm going to drag this down like so. While holding shift, I'm going to drag this down like so. And I'm going to play with these 2 points until it looks like it's going straight down. And then now when I play it through, it looks like this portion of the road is bending, which is looking pretty good right now. We're going to actually trim this composition so that it doesn't show the weird stuff happening on the left and the right. So I'm going to hit Control K to change the composition setting. We're going to make it 1080 by 1340, which is the portrait dimension for Instagram. And then now we have this to work with. I'm going to actually parent this cropped layer to the footage underneath over here so that I just need to reposition the bottom footage without worrying about the cropped one. And this layer over here, we're going to adjust the scale like so we can crop the portions that we don't want to see. In this case, we're going to do something like this. And then we're going to just drag it down if we need to, just by a little bit. Now, when I play it through, we basically have nailed our city bending effect. So that's the basic way of doing so. However, there's a slight detail that I think will add some depth to it. That's by right-clicking, going to new, and then adding an adjustment layer, which we will call darken. And we're going to bring up the curves effect, and we're going to darken everything. And we're going to take this rectangular tool, and we're going to only apply it to the bending portion over here. And we're just going to hit F so that we can feather it a little bit. And now this bent area looks a little bit darker, which I think really adds some depth to sell the road bending effect. And after some color grading, this is what you've got. There you guys have it. 3 different city bending techniques that you can use for your next travel video, music video, any kind of video that you think calls for it, really. They're trippy ways to make your establishing shots stand out, and they're fun to watch. Look at you bending cities like you're just playing with Lego pieces. It makes you feel powerful, but use your powers for good. And that's it, guys. As usual, stay tuned to the next tutorial from both Josh and myself. Sub to his channel so you don't miss a thing. Check out some other tutorials that I've done on his channel as well if you liked this one. And of course, check out my Instagram so you can stay up to date on what I've been up to. And until the next tutorial, let us bring it back over to Josh. I don't know what these hand signs are doing. I was gonna point to like Josh, but Josh is usually center frame, so this is why he does the endings. Take it away, Josh.
Herman, thank you so much for yet another incredible VFX tutorial. Please make sure to watch all the other incredible tutorials that we have in this month's Creative Week with Herman Huang. I got 2 more videos for you to check out right here. Remember, you can get a first month of Envato Elements for only $9 in the link below. We've stopped doing the free month offer. That's been an offer that's been going on for about 6 months. It finally came to an end, but you can still get the first month for $9. Every subscription really helps the channel, so please make sure to check it out. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and as always, remember to keep it chill.